I always believed that marriage was a sanctuary, a place where trust, love, and shared dreams created a world that belonged only to us. Our home, though modest, had always been filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of quiet understanding that comes from years of companionship. We were partners in every sense, sharing not just responsibilities and routines, but hopes, fears, and plans for the future. And I believed, with every fiber of my being, that nothing could shake the bond we had built together over the years. My husband, Daniel, was everything I had ever hoped for in a life partner. Charming, intelligent, caring, and attentive, he had a way of making me feel like the most important person in the world, even on my worst days. He remembered small details, celebrated my achievements as if they were his own, and made even mundane moments feel significant. Our friends often remarked on how perfect we seemed together, and for the longest time I believed it. Yet, even in the happiest of marriages, cracks can form in ways you never see coming. At first, they were subtle. A phone that buzzed late at night, a conversation cut short, the faintest tension in his eyes when I asked a simple question. I brushed them off, rationalizing that stress from work or fatigue must be the cause. Daniel had always been honest and transparent. He was the man who had promised to share everything with me, and for years he had lived up to that promise. So why would I doubt him now? Still, there were moments that nagged at the back of my mind. I remembered the week he had taken extra hours at the office, but seemed unusually distracted when he came home. There were weekends he claimed were filled with errands or meetings, yet he returned late, his explanations vague and hurried. My gut stirred unease I couldn't quite name, but I forced myself to trust him. After all, suspicion had no place in a marriage built on love, or so I told myself. We had built a life together, one of stability, laughter, and routine. We celebrated anniversaries with small, meaningful gestures. We shared a love for cooking and quiet Sunday mornings, and we supported each other through professional highs and lows. I had always admired Daniel's ambition, his ability to navigate challenges gracefully, and the way he balanced his career with family life. In many ways, I felt proud, lucky even, to be his partner, and yet, the first cracks in that illusion had started forming, almost imperceptibly. It began with a misplaced receipt, a small, seemingly insignificant detail. A dinner bill for a restaurant I had never heard of, dated during a week Daniel claimed he had been working late. I confronted him casually, expecting an explanation. It must be from a business client, he said smoothly, flashing that reassuring smile that had disarmed me countless times before. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But then there were the calls. The late-night calls that he would quickly silence when I entered the room. The way he would hold his phone close to his chest and mutter, "It's just work. Don't worry about it." Something in his tone, a subtle tension, made my heart clench, though I pushed the feeling aside. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that years of trust should outweigh fleeting doubts. Still, doubt has a way of burrowing quietly into the corners of your mind. I started noticing patterns. The receipts, the phone calls, the evasive answers, they were all tiny threads that, when woven together, hinted at a tapestry of secrets I couldn't yet comprehend. And the more I noticed, the more my intuition screamed that something was amiss. I tried to ignore it, tried to reassure myself that love should be blind to minor inconsistencies, but deep down, a storm was gathering. Life went on. We continued our routines, shared family dinners, and planned future vacations. I smiled, laughed, and pretended that all was well. Yet, in the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I replayed snippets of conversation, hidden glances, and unexplained absences. I began to feel a gnawing sense of unease, a creeping suspicion that my perfect life might not be as it seemed. And then, one evening, everything changed. It was a normal Thursday night. Daniel had claimed he was working late at the office. I prepared dinner for us both, set the table, and waited. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy when you are anticipating someone's arrival. When he finally walked through the door, something about him seemed different, less assured, almost cautious. He smiled at me, but the warmth was strained, almost rehearsed. I noticed the phone in his hand. It was locked, and for the first time, he seemed hesitant to put it down. I asked casually about his day, expecting the usual stories about meetings and office politics. He responded, but his answers were clipped, distracted, and inconsistent. A small, quiet alarm rang in my mind. My intuition had never been wrong before. That night, as I lay in bed, I tried to push the unease aside, telling myself that trust was the foundation of marriage. But the threads were pulling tighter, and denial became impossible. I realized I could no longer ignore the signs, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. Something was wrong, something was being hidden, and my life, the life I had built with the man I loved, was about to unravel in ways I could never have anticipated. The following days were filled with subtle observations. I watched, I listened, and I collected fragments of truth, snippets of conversation, patterns in his schedule, unexplained receipts, and the occasional slip of detail that seemed too carefully concealed. My heart ached with suspicion, but I knew I needed to see the full picture before confronting him. I needed evidence, clarity, and the courage to face whatever I would find. It was during this time that I began to piece together the first hints of something far more sinister than simple deception. I noticed payments to names I didn't recognize, vague references to locations I had never visited, and subtle changes in behavior that could not be explained by work stress or fatigue. My intuition told me that this was more than a temporary lapse. It was a hidden life, a secret carefully maintained, and a betrayal that would shatter everything I had believed about my marriage. The emotional weight was crushing. I felt torn between love and suspicion, loyalty and self-preservation. Every smile, every word of affection, now carried a shadow of doubt. I questioned myself constantly. Was I imagining things? Was I reading too much into coincidences, or was my heart, the same heart that had trusted him for years, sensing the truth that my mind had yet to confirm? It was in these quiet, lonely moments that I resolved to find out the truth. I couldn't continue living in a world where doubt overshadowed love, where betrayal lurked behind every unexplained gesture. I had to know, no matter the cost. And that is when the first undeniable evidence surfaced: a document, an email, a photograph. That confirmed my deepest fears. My husband, the man I had trusted, had a secret life. He had been hiding a family, a parallel existence for years, right under my nose. The shock was staggering, the betrayal incomprehensible. I felt as though the floor had dropped beneath me, leaving me suspended in a reality I could barely process. For hours I sat in silence, staring at the evidence, tears streaming, my mind spinning with questions. How could he have done this? How could someone I loved so deeply hide such a life from me? What did this mean for our marriage, our family, and my sense of self-worth? And yet, amid the whirlwind of grief, anger, and disbelief, a quiet determination began to grow. I realized that my silence would not be my plan. I would not be a passive victim. I would confront the truth, gather evidence, and reclaim my life with the dignity, clarity, and strength that betrayal could never take from me. The storm had begun. My world had shifted, irrevocably and painfully. But within that upheaval lay the seeds of empowerment, justice, and a plan that my husband could never have anticipated. He had assumed my trust, love, and silence would keep him safe. He had no idea that once I discovered the truth, my actions would be deliberate, strategic, and unstoppable. This was only the beginning. After the first unsettling signs, my life began to feel like a constant tightrope walk. One misstep, one question asked too sharply, and the delicate balance of our marriage could collapse entirely. I tried to push my suspicions aside, convincing myself that trust was the foundation of our relationship, that my love for Daniel could override these gnawing doubts. Yet the unease grew steadily, like a shadow lengthening across a sunlit room. It started with small, almost imperceptible inconsistencies. Daniel would claim to be at work late, yet his explanations seemed rehearsed, lacking the natural rhythm and spontaneity I had always known in him. When I casually asked about his day, his answers were clipped, or he would deflect with humor, an attempt, I realized later, to disarm my curiosity. Even the way he held his phone felt different. It was no longer a tool he used openly, but a shield, a barrier between him and the life we shared. I began noticing patterns in his behavior that previously would have seemed inconsequential. Certain nights, he would insist he needed personal time. In the study or bedroom, even when we had plans together. Sometimes he would answer texts or calls in hushed tones, quickly pocketing the phone if I entered the room. The casual glances he once gave me, filled with affection and openness, now seemed guarded, cautious, almost fearful that I might see beyond the facade he had meticulously maintained. My mind, which had always trusted him without question, now became a relentless investigator. I replayed moments from the past month, perhaps years, examining every small detail, every deviation from his usual routine. I questioned myself constantly. Was I imagining things? Was I overreacting, reading too much into ordinary circumstances? But a small, stubborn voice inside me, the one that had never led me astray, kept whispering that something was deeply wrong. The subtle signs became more blatant over time. I noticed unexplained payments in our joint account statements, small but frequent, to names I did not recognize. A receipt for a restaurant I had never been to appeared mysteriously among the bills. Notes I had never seen before were tucked away in drawers I had always considered private, and certain documents seemed deliberately hidden. Each discovery was like a small wound, a reminder that the trust I had taken for granted was fragile, perhaps even illusory. The emotional toll was immense. I oscillated between hope and despair, desperately wanting to believe in his innocence, yet simultaneously fearing the truth my intuition had already hinted at. Nights became sleepless as I replayed encounters, emails, and conversations, searching for clues. I found myself checking our shared calendar, scanning for irregularities, and analyzing patterns in his movements. Each anomaly, no matter how minor, felt like a thread leading to a larger, terrifying tapestry of secrets. Friends and family began to notice my distraction. I was polite but distant, cordial but preoccupied. I could see their concern in their eyes when I laughed half-heartedly at dinner conversations or missed casual get-togethers. I didn't want to share the growing suspicion with anyone, not even my closest friends. There was a part of me that feared judgment, that feared I might be wrong and ruin a perfectly good marriage with baseless accusations. The weight of the secret suspicion was mine alone to bear, and it pressed down on me relentlessly. The most difficult moments were those when Daniel was near, projecting the same warmth and normalcy he had always displayed. His smile, once so comforting, now felt performative, as though it was designed to distract me from the truth I was beginning to sense. I felt a complex mix of longing and suspicion, longing for the man I had married, and suspicion for the man he had become, or perhaps always had been, hidden beneath layers of deceit. I started keeping track of small inconsistencies, almost like a detective. Who had he called at 11:00 p.m.? Why did he delete a particular message when he thought I wasn't looking? Which nights did he come home with excuses that didn't quite fit? I catalogued each instance meticulously, not yet ready to confront him, but determined to find clarity. The unease became a quiet obsession, filling every idle moment with questions that demanded answers. Conversations with him became delicate exercises in observation. I listened not just to his words, but to his tone, his gestures, and his eye movements. I watched for signs of guilt, hesitation, or overcompensation. Each attempt at casual inquiry, "Did anything unusual happen today?" or "Who did you meet for lunch?" was met with answers that were technically truthful, but strategically vague. My suspicion deepened. I realized that if he was hiding something, it was no accident. It was calculated, deliberate, and designed to protect a secret far larger than I could yet imagine. The emotional conflict was overwhelming. I loved him. I had built my life around him, yet the signs suggested betrayal. My loyalty clashed violently with my growing awareness of deceit. I struggled with guilt for doubting him, for scrutinizing his every action, for letting my mind drift toward worst-case scenarios. I tried to remind myself that love requires trust, but love also demands honesty. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the truth, however painful, would ultimately be better than living in this shadow of suspicion. The unease reached a tipping point one evening when I accidentally intercepted a text that was meant for someone else. I caught just a fragment of a message that hinted at meetings and arrangements. I did not know of details that didn't involve work, family, or friends I knew. My heart raced as I realized the implications. The fragment was vague, but it carried the unmistakable undertone of secrecy, of plans made behind my back. That night I lay awake, the image of my husband in a different world, a hidden reality beyond my knowledge, pressing into my mind like a weight I could not escape. I began reflecting on past interactions, searching for missed signals. That weekend getaway he had suggested last year, the long business trips with odd excuses, the friends he never wanted me to meet, every detail suddenly took on a new, chilling significance. The realization settled slowly and painfully. This was not just a small deception. This was a life carefully divided, a secret meticulously maintained. The man I had loved, trusted, and relied upon had created a shadow existence, one I had never been part of. The psychological toll was intense. I felt isolated, trapped between love and fear, between hope and despair. At work, friends would notice my distracted demeanor. At home, the silent tension between us thickened the air. I longed for clarity, for the moment when I could confront the reality of his actions, but fear held me back. The fear of being wrong, the fear of confrontation, the fear of shattering the life we had built. Yet, despite the fear, my resolve strengthened. Each inconsistency, each fragment of evidence, and each evasive response added to a growing conviction. I could no longer ignore the truth. I had to uncover what he was hiding, no matter how painful the revelation might be. I began organizing notes, collecting evidence, and preparing mentally for the confrontation that was inevitable. This was no longer just about suspicion. It was about reclaiming agency in a life that seemed increasingly dominated by deception. Days turned into weeks, and the unease grew almost unbearable. I noticed subtle changes in his behavior, moments of overcompensation, excessive attentiveness, or defensiveness when asked minor questions. The very traits I had once admired now appeared as tools of manipulation, carefully calibrated to mask a secret. I realized that the person I thought I knew, the man I had trusted completely, was not fully visible to me. Parts of his life had been hidden, and the consequences of discovering them would likely be life-altering. During this period, I also reflected on the nature of betrayal and trust. Betrayal is not only the act itself, but the silence and concealment that accompany it. Trust, once broken, leaves an indelible mark not just on the relationship, but on the psyche of the one who was deceived. I began to feel a growing sense of empowerment alongside my fear. If I could uncover the truth, I could reclaim control over my own life, my emotions, and the future of our family. One evening, as I reviewed yet another inconsistency in his schedule, I made a silent vow. I would not allow myself to be deceived any longer. I would observe, gather evidence, and confront the truth with clarity and courage. Whether the revelation led to reconciliation, confrontation, or the end of our marriage, I knew that I had to face reality directly. My silence would not protect him, and my ignorance would not protect me. The storm of suspicion and unease had reached its zenith. I could feel the inevitability of discovery approaching, a moment where the carefully maintained secret would collide with my determination to know the truth. The tension was suffocating, but it also galvanized me. I was no longer merely a passive participant in our marriage. I was an active seeker of truth, prepared to navigate the emotional and practical consequences of betrayal. And so the stage was set. The man I loved, the husband I had trusted, had a secret life hidden in plain sight. And I, the one he assumed would remain oblivious, was preparing to uncover every hidden corner of that life, no matter how shocking or devastating it might be. The quiet unease of suspicion had transformed into a deliberate, determined quest for clarity, justice, and empowerment. The next step was inevitable, discovery. The moment of discovery came like a silent earthquake, shaking the very foundation of the life I had built. It began innocuously enough. An envelope, misplaced or perhaps deliberately left where I could find it. I had noticed it the previous evening, tucked behind a stack of bills in our shared study. At first, I hesitated, my hands trembling as I reached for it. The envelope bore no name, only a folded letter inside and several photographs that would forever change my perception of Daniel and our marriage. As I unfolded the letter, my heart pounded. Words that once seemed distant, abstract, and unimaginable now confronted me in stark clarity. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. Daniel had a secret family. Names I had never heard, addresses I had never visited, dates that overlapped with the vacations and business trips he had claimed were alone. Every detail painted a picture of deception, so meticulous that it seemed almost surreal. I held the photographs with shaking hands. There he was, my husband, smiling, holding the hands of children I had never met, standing next to a woman who was not me. The casual warmth in those images, the normalcy of the smiles, the intimacy captured in those moments, crushed me in a way I could not have anticipated. The man I loved, trusted, and had built a life with had been leading a double existence. Every shared dinner, every late night conversation, every tender gesture, now filtered through the lens of betrayal, felt tainted. I remember the first wave of emotions as a storm of disbelief and rage. How could he do this? How could he carry on a life, hidden from me, under my nose? How could he look me in the eyes, speak words of love, and simultaneously build another reality with another family? The questions swirled like a cyclone, relentless and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to rip the truth from his lips by force if necessary. But even in my shock, a quiet, determined voice inside me insisted, I must understand everything first. I could not confront him blindly. I had to have the full picture, the evidence to reclaim my voice and dignity. The discovery forced me to confront years of denial. I replayed memories in my mind, trying to reconcile the man I had loved with the man who had been hiding such a profound secret. Every late night call, every unexplained absence, every small inconsistency that I had tried to rationalize suddenly took on a new, haunting significance. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, revealing a parallel world I had unknowingly shared space with for years. I began searching for further evidence, each piece confirming the horrifying reality. Emails, messages, hidden receipts, and subtle references to people and places I had never encountered. It all fit together like a puzzle, each piece revealing the depth of deception. My hands shook as I pieced together timelines, cross-referencing vacations, work trips, and events with the dates in the letters and photographs. There was no mistake. There was no misinterpretation. The truth was undeniable. My husband had a secret life, a family I had never known, and a reality he had meticulously hidden from me for years. The moment I confronted him, my emotions surged in an uncontrollable flood. Daniel, how could you? The words escaped my lips before I could stop them, each syllable a mixture of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. He froze, his eyes widening, a faint pallor crossing his face. For the first time, the confident, charming man I had known seemed vulnerable, cornered. He tried to respond, fumbling through excuses, promises, and attempts at minimizing the betrayal. It's complicated. I didn't want to hurt you, please. Don't make this public. He pleaded, his voice shaking, but my shock and sorrow had transformed into a steely resolve. I could no longer be manipulated by his charm, his words, or his attempts at control. I remember standing there, the evidence spread across the dining table, feeling the raw weight of betrayal pressing down on me. It wasn't just the existence of another family. It was the years of lies, the carefully constructed facade, the manipulation of trust that cut the deepest. Every act of love I had believed to be genuine now carried a shadow of deceit. My life, my marriage, my sense of security, it all felt irrevocably broken. Tears streamed down my face, but amid the heartbreak, a quiet clarity began to form. I understood that this was not just a personal betrayal. It was a challenge to my identity, my self-respect, and my agency. I had a choice. I could crumble, let the deceit define me, or I could reclaim my power, confront the truth, and take control of the narrative that had been stolen from me. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotion and reflection. I oscillated between grief, anger, and disbelief, each moment a new test of endurance. I thought about the children in the hidden family, wondering about their lives, their innocence, and the ethical and moral implications of Daniel's actions. I thought about the impact on our extended family, friends, and the community who had believed in the life we portrayed together. And I thought about myself, the woman whose trust had been shattered, whose love had been manipulated, and whose future now hung in delicate balance. In the quiet solitude of my own space, I began to organize my thoughts and evidence. This was no longer about mere suspicion. It was about confronting a deliberate, ongoing deception with clarity, strategy, and purpose. I created timelines, documented communications, and noted inconsistencies with meticulous precision. Each detail, no matter how small, would later serve as a foundation for confronting the truth and ensuring that my voice could not be silenced. The confrontation with Daniel was inevitable. I knew that any attempt to address the situation without preparation could allow him to manipulate the narrative further, deflect responsibility, or intimidate me into silence. I steeled myself, drawing on an inner strength I hadn't fully realized I possessed. This was no longer just about marriage. It was about justice, integrity, and reclaiming control over a life that had been built on trust but marred by deception. I also began to reflect deeply on human behavior, on the motives that drive people to conceal truths and create parallel realities. Daniel's actions were rooted in fear, desire, and perhaps selfishness, but understanding the why did not excuse the what. I could analyze, empathize, or rationalize, but the betrayal remained an undeniable fact. My husband had hidden an entire family from me, manipulating my trust for years. The psychological toll was immense. I experienced sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and a lingering sense of vulnerability. Yet, paradoxically, the clarity of discovery also brought empowerment. Knowing the truth, as painful as it was, allowed me to stop the cycle of uncertainty, stop questioning myself, and start preparing for the actions I needed to take. Knowledge, even when devastating, is a form of power, and I now held it firmly in my hands. I also considered the emotional journey of reconciliation, forgiveness, and boundaries. Could our marriage survive this? Could trust be rebuilt, or was the betrayal too vast, too deep to overcome? These questions haunted me, but I realized that any decision I made must come from a place of strength, not fear or manipulation. I would not allow guilt, coercion, or emotional pressure to dictate my response. I had to be deliberate, decisive, and unwavering in protecting my dignity and well-being. As the initial shock faded, my resolve solidified. I would not be passive, silent, or complicit. Daniel had believed his deception could continue indefinitely, hidden beneath layers of charm, manipulation, and calculated secrecy. But he had underestimated my resolve, my intelligence, and my capacity to confront the truth. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the betrayal, assert my boundaries, and reclaim the life and respect that had been compromised by years of hidden deceit. The discovery had been painful, overwhelming, and disorienting. Yet, in that moment of clarity, I understood something fundamental. Betrayal may shatter illusions, but it cannot destroy truth, resilience, or courage. And armed with evidence, planning, and unwavering resolve, I was ready to confront the man who had hidden a life from me and ensure that his manipulations could no longer dictate the course of my life. The storm had arrived, the veil had been lifted, and the journey from shock to empowerment, from betrayal to action, had only just begun. After the storm of discovery, I felt like a woman walking through rubble. The world I had known, the life I had trusted, lay fractured before me. And yet, amid the devastation, a quiet, determined voice began to emerge, one that refused to be silenced, one that demanded clarity, justice, and agency. I knew immediately that I could not allow the betrayal to define me or dictate the next steps of my life. I had to act, but I had to do so with strategy, patience, and precision. The first step was reflection. I needed to understand my emotions, sift through the grief, the anger, and the humiliation, and find a center of calm amidst the chaos. I spent hours alone, sometimes crying, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory, every conversation, every subtle sign I had ignored. The hurt was raw, almost unbearable, but I recognized its importance. This emotional clarity was the foundation upon which I would build a plan. Acting while overwhelmed by raw emotion could lead to mistakes, rash decisions, and potentially to further pain. I began by documenting everything meticulously. Every phone call, every email, every fragment of evidence I had stumbled upon was recorded. Dates, times, locations, and even subtle changes in his behavior were noted. I created timelines, cross-referenced schedules, and compiled photographs and letters. Each piece of evidence was a building block in constructing a clear picture of the deception. I knew that when the time came to confront Daniel or to take action, having an organized, undeniable record would be crucial, not just to prove his betrayal, but to reclaim my voice with authority and credibility. While gathering evidence, I also began to consider the broader implications of his actions. Daniel's secret family was not just a personal betrayal, it had real-world consequences. There were legal, financial, and social dimensions to consider. How would this affect our shared assets? What about the potential involvement of children, both ours and his other family? Could there be manipulations that I had not yet discovered? These questions pressed heavily on my mind, reminding me that this was not just an emotional battle. It was a strategic one. I realized early on that I could not navigate this alone. While friends could offer emotional support, I needed allies who understood the legal and practical ramifications of such a betrayal. I discreetly reached out to a trusted confidante, a friend who had navigated family and marital complexities with integrity and discretion. We spoke in hushed tones, often late at night, exploring possibilities, weighing risks, and preparing for the eventual confrontation. Their guidance helped me frame my thoughts and consider strategies that were both ethical and effective. The next step was research. I spent hours understanding the legal protections and recourse available in cases of marital deception and hidden families. I researched financial safeguards, custody implications, and strategies for evidence collection. Knowledge became empowerment. The more I understood my options, the more I felt in control. I learned that preparation, evidence, and a clear plan could shift the balance of power, even in situations where deceit had previously ruled. At the same time, I had to manage the emotional warfare within myself. The betrayal had left scars, deep, painful, and raw. I found myself questioning my judgment, my ability to trust, and even my worth. Nights were the hardest, filled with restless thoughts, vivid memories of shared moments now tainted by deceit. But I refused to let the emotional turmoil cloud my strategy. Meditation, journaling, and small acts of self-care became critical anchors, helping me stay centered, focused, and resolute. Once I had clarity, evidence, and a support system in place, I began to outline the confrontation itself. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a carefully constructed plan. I considered the timing, the location, and the possible reactions. I rehearsed what I would say, anticipating attempts at manipulation, excuses, and apologies. I understood that Daniel would likely attempt to guilt or charm me back into silence, and I needed to be prepared to counteract every tactic with calm authority and unwavering resolve. One of the most challenging aspects of planning was deciding the scope of the confrontation. Would it be a private discussion between the two of us, a mediated conversation with witnesses, or something that involved legal intervention? I weighed the pros and cons of each approach, considering my goals: to assert my boundaries, to confront the betrayal, to protect my interests, and to prevent further manipulation. Every possibility required careful thought and preparation. As I strategized, I also prepared mentally for the emotional intensity of the confrontation. I knew that facing Daniel would trigger a cascade of feelings: anger, hurt, sadness, and possibly even guilt at seeing the man I loved reduced by his own choices. I trained myself to stay composed, to focus on facts rather than emotions, and to keep my ultimate goal in mind: reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and my life. While planning, I also considered contingencies. What if he denied everything? What if he tried to manipulate the evidence? What if he attempted to gaslight me or turn the narrative against me? Anticipating these possibilities allowed me to develop counter strategies. I ensured that every piece of evidence I had was secure, copied, and backed up. I knew that preparation would be my greatest ally in a confrontation where deceit had previously held power. Throughout this process, I also reflected on my growth. Betrayal, while painful, revealed strengths I had not fully recognized. My patience, resilience, analytical skills, and moral clarity had been sharpened by the ordeal. I realized that empowerment comes not only from action, but from deliberate, thoughtful preparation. I was no longer merely reacting to deception. I was proactively shaping the course of my life. Finally, after weeks of preparation, I reached a point of readiness. I had organized evidence, clarified my goals, rehearsed responses, and built a network of support. I had cultivated the emotional resilience to withstand manipulation, charm, or guilt. I had considered every contingency, every possible outcome, and every risk. I knew that when the moment came, I would act not from fear or anger, but from clarity, courage, and the unwavering commitment to reclaiming control over my life. The moment of confrontation, the culmination of reflection, evidence, gathering, and planning, loomed on the horizon. Daniel had assumed that his deception would remain hidden, that my trust and love would keep me silent. But he had underestimated my resolve, my intelligence, and my capacity to confront betrayal with precision. The storm was coming, and I would meet it with deliberate force, unwavering confidence, and a plan that would leave no room for doubt or manipulation. This stage of planning transformed my fear into empowerment, my grief into determination, and my betrayal into a roadmap for action. I was no longer a passive participant in my own life. I was the architect of the next chapter, ready to confront the hidden truths, assert my boundaries, and ensure that deceit could no longer dominate the narrative of my marriage. The preparation was exhausting, emotionally taxing, and often painful. But it was necessary. Every document reviewed, every timeline constructed, every emotional rehearsal strengthened my resolve. I had reached a point where I could face Daniel with clarity, confidence, and authority. I knew that the confrontation would be intense, that emotions would surge, and that the outcome was uncertain. Yet I was ready. I had planned for every angle, every potential manipulation, and every reaction. The betrayal that had once left me reeling now became a catalyst for empowerment. The discovery had ignited a fire, the planning had focused it, and the confrontation would channel it into action. I understood that the path ahead would be challenging, but I was prepared. I would face Daniel, the man who had hidden a family from me, with evidence, strategy, and unwavering resolve. The storm had shifted from suspicion and discovery to deliberate action. I was no longer a passive victim of betrayal. I was an active force, ready to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my voice. The moment of confrontation was imminent, and I would face it with the strength, clarity, and courage that betrayal could never take from me. The day of confrontation arrived with a weight that pressed on my chest like a physical force. I remember standing in our living room, the evidence meticulously organized in folders, letters, photographs, and timelines spread across the dining table. Every detail, every discrepancy, every fragment of deception was there in plain view. My heart pounded with a mix of anxiety, anticipation, and a deep, determined resolve. This was the moment I had prepared for: years of trust shattered, betrayal exposed, and the opportunity to reclaim my voice. Daniel arrived home from work that evening, casually unaware, or perhaps pretending to be, of the storm about to descend upon him. He smiled as he entered, the same charming, familiar grin that had once melted my heart. But this time it had no effect. I returned his greeting with measured composure. a calm that masked the intensity of the emotions churning beneath the surface. I had rehearsed this moment countless times, and I was ready to confront the reality of his deception. "Daniel," I began, my voice steady, controlled, yet firm, "we need to talk. Sit down." There was no preamble, no hesitation. My tone carried authority, a weight that immediately unsettled him. He sensed, I could see, that this was not a casual conversation. It was the culmination of months of suspicion, investigation, and preparation. He hesitated, a subtle shift in posture, a flash of unease crossing his face. "What is this about?" he asked, trying to mask nervousness with casual curiosity. But I saw through it. I had seen the cracks in his carefully constructed facade during the weeks of planning, the inconsistencies, the evasions. I had anticipated his questions, his deflections, his attempts to minimize the truth. I opened the first folder and laid out the photographs. "Do you recognize these?" I asked, pointing to images of him with a woman and children I had never met. His smile faltered, his eyes widened, but his mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again. I didn't allow him to respond. I continued, my voice unwavering. "These aren't coincidences. These aren't misunderstandings. This is your secret family, isn't it?" He swallowed hard, a faint quiver in his jaw. The confident demeanor he usually carried nowhere to be found. For a moment he said nothing. I could see the internal battle raging within him, the instinct to lie, to manipulate, to charm, and the unavoidable truth staring back at him from the evidence before him. I can explain," he began, his voice faltering, but I cut him off, holding up the letters, receipts, and timelines. "No, Daniel, you don't get to explain. Not yet. I need to hear the truth, unfiltered, without excuses. How long has this been going on? How many lies have you told? How many moments of our life were spent with me blind to this reality?" The anger in my voice was tempered by the calm I had cultivated during planning. I had learned that confrontation required not just passion, but precision. Every question, every pause, every gesture was calculated to elicit truth and prevent manipulation. I could see him squirm, his confidence unraveling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. He finally spoke, his voice strained, defensive, yet tinged with fear. "It's complicated. I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant to hurt you." I listened, letting him speak, observing every nuance, every tell, every flicker of emotion. But his words could not undo years of deception. They were hollow attempts at damage control, inadequate against the meticulous documentation I had gathered. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his, unflinching. "You didn't want to hurt me. Do you realize what you've done? You've built an entire life in parallel, hidden from me, while pretending to be faithful, loving, and honest. Every touch, every promise, every moment of trust was manipulated. This isn't just a mistake, Daniel. This is betrayal, pure and simple." He looked away, shame and fear etched across his face. The man I had loved, admired, and trusted seemed diminished, stripped of pretense by the sheer clarity of the evidence before him. I could see the realization in his eyes. He had underestimated me, assumed I would remain oblivious, or be too weak to confront the truth. He had misjudged my resolve. I continued, voice steady, precise, "And now you face the consequences of your choices. I have the evidence, I have the timeline, and I have the clarity you tried to deny me. You may have thought you controlled the narrative, but the story is mine now. You cannot manipulate, charm, or excuse your way out of this." His response was a mix of apology and defensiveness, a desperate attempt to regain some control. "Please, don't ruin everything. I can fix this, we can fix this." But I had anticipated this. I had rehearsed my response. "No, Daniel, there is nothing to fix that doesn't begin with honesty, accountability, and respect. You had the power to be truthful from the start, and you chose deception. That is your choice, and now you must live with it." I presented the financial records next, detailing the resources and arrangements he had kept secret. "Explain these payments, explain these hidden expenses. Explain how you could manage a life in parallel without me ever noticing. Every detail, Daniel, I have documented. Every lie, every omission. Every secret is here. You cannot deny it." He faltered, fumbling through half-formed excuses, denials, and pleas. But the evidence was overwhelming, a concrete, undeniable record of years of deception. I realized in that moment that confrontation was not just about forcing admission. It was about reclaiming my power, asserting control, and making it clear that manipulation and lies would no longer dominate my life. The confrontation grew more intense as we discussed the hidden family. I demanded answers about their lives, the nature of his relationship with them, and the reasons behind his secrecy. Every detail he provided only confirmed my suspicions. The secrecy was deliberate, maintained for years, and calculated to keep me ignorant. The depth of the betrayal was staggering, yet in this moment of clarity, I felt a strange empowerment. Knowledge, after all, is power, and I now possessed the full truth. I also asserted boundaries. You will not continue to control or manipulate this situation. Your choices have consequences. I will determine how this information affects my life, my decisions, and my future, and nothing you say now will diminish the betrayal you've committed. My voice was firm, unwavering, and resolute. I could see the fear in his eyes, a reflection of the control I had regained. Finally, I outlined the next steps. This confrontation was not the end. It was the beginning of accountability. Legal consultations, discussions about finances, custody considerations, and potential reconciliation or separation. All of these would be guided by evidence, clarity, and respect for truth. I had transformed shock and grief into strategic action, and Daniel's world, carefully constructed over years of deception, was beginning to crumble under the weight of reality. By the end of the confrontation, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. I had faced the man who had hidden a life from me, presented undeniable evidence, and asserted my voice with authority. The betrayal had been exposed, the illusions shattered, and the path forward, though uncertain, was mine to navigate. For the first time in months, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Betrayal had tested me, pushed me to the brink, and revealed both vulnerability and strength I had not fully recognized. I had confronted deception with courage, strategy, and integrity. And though the journey ahead would be challenging, the confrontation marked the turning point, from silence and manipulation to action, empowerment, and truth. I walked away from that room with my head held high, my heart still heavy with the weight of betrayal, but my spirit strengthened by the knowledge that I would no longer be a passive participant in a life defined by lies. I had confronted the truth, reclaimed my voice, and set the stage for justice, closure, and the next chapter of my life. The confrontation had ended, but the storm it unleashed was only beginning. The truth of Daniel's deception had been laid bare, and there was no turning back. What followed was a whirlwind of decisions, consequences, and reckonings that tested not only my resolve but the very foundations of my life. The first wave of fallout was immediate. The emotional shock reverberated through our family, friends, and close circles. The people who had trusted the image of our marriage began to see the cracks that had always existed, but were hidden beneath a polished facade. Some were supportive, offering comfort and encouragement, while others were skeptical, unwilling, or unable to accept that the man they had admired could orchestrate such a profound betrayal. I had to navigate these relationships carefully, protecting my dignity while asserting the truth. Daniel, for his part, seemed diminished by the confrontation. The veneer of control he had carefully maintained for years was gone, replaced by defensiveness, guilt, and a desperate need to salvage his reputation. But the evidence I had collected was unassailable. Letters, photographs, financial records, and meticulously documented timelines left no room for doubt. This wasn't about opinion or perception. It was fact, and facts do not bend to manipulation. Legal action became inevitable. While my initial intent had been to confront and reclaim my voice, it quickly became clear that the deception had financial, custodial, and ethical consequences that could not be resolved by confrontation alone. I engaged a trusted attorney, someone well-versed in family law, privacy, and marital rights. Together, we outlined the path forward, asset division, potential custody arrangements, and steps to hold Daniel accountable for his deliberate concealment. The legal process was emotionally taxing. Court dates, mediation sessions, and consultations with professionals became part of my daily life. I had to relive the betrayal repeatedly, recounting details that still burned with fresh intensity. Yet, in this process, I discovered an inner strength I had underestimated. Each meeting, each negotiation, each procedural step reinforced my agency. I was no longer a passive victim. I was a participant in shaping justice and reclaiming control over my life. Meanwhile, Daniel's attempts to manipulate the situation became transparent. He tried to charm attorneys, sway mediators, and appeal to sympathy, but his efforts were futile against the organized, documented evidence I had meticulously prepared. His credibility began to crumble in both personal and legal spheres, as the truth of his deception became undeniable. Friends and family, who had once been caught in his web of charm, now recognized the reality of his actions. The emotional fallout was equally profound. I experienced waves of grief, anger, relief, and cautious empowerment. I grieved not only for the betrayal itself, but for the years I had invested in a relationship that had been built partially on deceit. Anger surged frequently, often when I least expected it, but I learned to channel it into deliberate action rather than destructive impulse. Relief came in small, quiet moments, the knowledge that the truth was finally acknowledged, that my voice had been heard, and that justice, in whatever form it would take, was within reach. One of the most complex aspects of the fallout was navigating the intersection of private and public consequences. While I wanted accountability, I also sought to protect my privacy and the dignity of all parties involved, particularly if children were affected. Legal counsel guided me in maintaining a careful balance, enforcing justice without descending into vindictiveness, asserting boundaries without causing unnecessary harm, and ensuring that betrayal did not define the entirety of my future. I also had to confront my own expectations and emotional responses. I realized that justice could take many forms: legal recognition, financial accountability, social acknowledgement, and personal closure. While some outcomes were within my control, others were not. Accepting this was essential to maintaining my equilibrium and preventing the lingering effects of betrayal from dictating my future. In parallel, I focused on rebuilding my sense of self. The years of manipulation had eroded confidence, trust, and self-esteem. I took deliberate steps to reclaim these qualities: therapy sessions, reflective journaling, reconnecting with supportive friends, and establishing new routines that reinforced my independence and strength. Each small step, each act of self-care, was a declaration that betrayal could not extinguish my identity or my resilience. As the legal and personal processes unfolded, Daniel faced tangible consequences. Financial responsibilities he had hidden or avoided were brought into the open. Custodial discussions clarified responsibilities and boundaries, ensuring that his actions could no longer have unchecked influence. Socially, his credibility and relationships began to deteriorate. People who had once admired or trusted him began to recognize the pattern of manipulation and deceit, and his reputation suffered accordingly. Witnessing these outcomes provided a sense of resolution that was both empowering and sobering. Justice was not merely about retribution. It was about restoring balance, enforcing accountability, and protecting the integrity of my life. I learned that confronting betrayal is not just an emotional act. It is a strategic and principled one, requiring patience, clarity, and courage. By the end of this phase, I could feel the weight of betrayal beginning to lift. The confrontation had exposed the truth, legal mechanisms had enforced accountability, and my resilience had been strengthened. While scars remained emotional, psychological, and relational, they were no longer sources of helplessness. Instead, they became markers of survival, growth, and empowerment. I also reflected on the broader lessons of the experience. Trust, once broken, requires both evidence and deliberate boundaries to restore or replace. Power dynamics in relationships are fragile, and deception, when revealed, can shift them dramatically. Most importantly, the experience reinforced a fundamental truth. I am responsible for asserting my boundaries, protecting my well-being, and ensuring that my voice is heard in every aspect of my Life, in the quiet moments after the legal and personal reckonings, I began to plan for the future. I envisioned a life defined not by betrayal, but by clarity, strength, and intentionality. I set new goals, prioritized self-care, and sought relationships both personal and professional that aligned with honesty, respect, and mutual accountability. The fallout, while painful, had catalyzed a transformation that I would carry forward. Ultimately, justice was not simply punitive, it was restorative. It ensured accountability, provided clarity, and allowed me to reclaim agency over my life. Daniel's actions could no longer dictate my choices, manipulate my emotions, or compromise my identity. The storm had passed, leaving behind not just scars, but also resilience, insight, and empowerment. The journey from discovery to confrontation to fallout had been grueling, but it had reshaped my understanding of trust, betrayal, and personal power. I had faced deception, documented evidence, confronted the betrayer, navigated legal and social consequences, and emerged with my voice intact. While the pain of betrayal would linger, the justice enforced provided a foundation upon which to rebuild, reclaim, and thrive. The aftermath was a testament to resilience, strategy, and the refusal to remain passive in the face of deceit. I had confronted a hidden reality, ensured accountability, and established boundaries that protected my future. The process reaffirmed that betrayal, no matter how devastating, can be met with courage, clarity, and decisive action. And in that knowledge, I found both closure and strength. The dust of confrontation and fallout had settled, and in its quiet aftermath, I found myself standing at a threshold, a place between the life I had known and the life I was now determined to build. The journey from suspicion to discovery, planning, confrontation, and justice had left scars that would never fully fade. But those scars were not symbols of defeat. They were evidence of endurance, courage, and transformation. In the days that followed, I spent hours reflecting on what had happened, analyzing the trajectory of my marriage, and examining my responses to betrayal. At first, it was impossible not to feel the sting of grief. I mourned the trust that had been shattered, the illusions that had been destroyed, and the years lost to deception. Memories that had once brought comfort now carried the sharp edge of betrayal. Each shared laughter, each intimate moment, each gesture of love was now tinged with the bitter aftertaste of duplicity. But amid the grief, a profound awareness emerged. The experience, as painful as it had been, had revealed a strength within me I had never fully recognized. I had faced one of life's most intimate betrayals, and yet I had navigated the chaos with clarity, strategy, and unwavering resolve. I had taken control of a situation designed to disempower me. In confronting deceit, I had reclaimed my voice, my agency, and my dignity. I reflected on the nature of trust, its fragility, and the responsibilities it entails. Trust is not given lightly. It is nurtured, protected, and mutually honored. When broken, it can shatter the foundation of even the closest relationships. But trust, once lost, also reveals the true character of those involved. Through Daniel's actions, I learned the harsh reality that love without honesty is a fragile illusion. Loyalty, affection, and commitment are meaningless if they are accompanied by secrecy and deceit. In parallel, I examined my role, not in causing the betrayal, but in navigating it. I realized the importance of awareness, vigilance, and self-respect. Suspicion alone is insufficient. What matters is how one responds when confronted with the truth. I had chosen deliberate action over passive suffering. I had documented evidence, sought counsel, and approached confrontation with precision and integrity. My response had not been fueled solely by emotion, but guided by strategy, foresight, and moral clarity. In doing so, I learned that empowerment is born not only from surviving betrayal, but from confronting it decisively. The process also reshaped my understanding of relationships and boundaries. While love is essential, it cannot substitute for honesty, accountability, and respect. I now recognize that boundaries are not arbitrary. They are vital safeguards that protect emotional and psychological well-being. Betrayal had tested these boundaries, revealing both vulnerabilities and the necessity of firm, principled limits. I vowed never again to allow trust to be manipulated or to accept deceit as a compromise for affection. Reflection brought another insight. Betrayal often isolates, but it can also illuminate the importance of supportive networks. Friends, confidantes, and professionals who offered guidance, empathy, and practical advice became pillars of strength. Their presence reinforced the truth that no one must face betrayal alone. Seeking help is not weakness, it is wisdom. I learned to value honest counsel, to lean on those who act in your best interest, and to recognize the difference between validation and manipulation. I also considered the broader life lessons this experience offered: deception, while illusions and hidden capacities within me. I discovered that patience, analytical acuity, and emotional devastation can catalyze growth. Pain can foster resilience. Loss can inspire discernment. The journey through betrayal revealed both vulnerability and fortitude I had never fully acknowledged. The process of confronting deceit had not only enforced accountability, but had also cultivated a profound self-awareness and maturity. As I processed these lessons, I felt the weight of forgiveness, not for Daniel's benefit, but for my peace of mind. Forgiveness does not erase betrayal, nor does it excuse wrongdoing. Rather, it allows the one who has been wronged to release the grip of anger, bitterness, and obsession. I did not forgive blindly. I forgave with understanding, maintaining boundaries, and asserting accountability. This act of conscious release brought a sense of liberation that was vital for moving forward. I reflected on the emotional spectrum that betrayal had forced me to navigate: grief, anger, shock, empowerment, clarity, and finally, acceptance. Each emotion was a teacher. Grief taught the value of honesty in mourning. Anger reinforced the necessity of assertiveness. Shock highlighted the fragility of perception. Empowerment revealed latent strength. Clarity illuminated purpose. Acceptance offered peace. The journey was arduous, but it cultivated wisdom that would guide future choices, relationships, and decisions. Looking ahead, I embraced the opportunity to redefine my life on my terms. Trust, honesty, and integrity would become non-negotiable pillars in all interactions. I would foster relationships that respected these principles, while distancing myself from those who could not. The betrayal that once threatened to define me would now serve as a reference point for discernment, vigilance, and intentional living. I also recognized the necessity of balance. While the journey had demanded strategic thinking and decisive action, it was equally essential to nurture emotional healing, self-compassion, and resilience. I began integrating practices that fostered inner peace: journaling, mindfulness, supportive community, and creative expression. These became tools not just for recovery, but for sustaining strength and clarity in the face of future challenges. In retrospect, the betrayal had revealed the stark contrast between appearances and reality. Love, trust, and commitment are visible in actions, not words alone. I understood now that vigilance, discernment, and self-respect are crucial complements to affection. The lessons were painful but invaluable. One must cultivate clarity, document concerns, assert boundaries, and act decisively when faced with duplicity. I also reflected on empowerment as a continuous process. Confronting deceit had been one chapter. Rebuilding, restoring, and reshaping life was the next. Empowerment is not a momentary act. It is a practice of integrity, courage, and intentional living. The journey had taught me to act with both wisdom and strength, to prioritize truth over comfort, and to protect my agency above all else. As I considered the broader human experience, I recognized the universality of betrayal. Everyone, at some point, faces deception, disloyalty, or dishonesty. Yet, the difference lies not in the betrayal itself, but in the response. One can be crushed by deceit, or one can confront it, learn from it, and transform it into empowerment. I chose the latter. The betrayal became a catalyst for growth, an opportunity to assert boundaries, and a lesson in resilience that would echo throughout my life. Finally, I understood that closure is not found in revenge or punishment alone. It emerges through self-realization, accountability, and the conscious reclamation of life and dignity. Daniel's actions were exposed, justice had been enforced, and my voice was no longer silenced. The journey from shock to empowerment, from grief to clarity, had transformed both my perspective and my future. In this reflection, I also felt gratitude for the lessons learned, for the support received, and for the inner strength discovered. Betrayal had forced a confrontation with truth, and in facing it, I emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. The experience, though painful, became a foundation for intentional living, resilience, and a renewed commitment to honesty, integrity, and self-respect. As I looked forward, I envisioned a life defined not by deception, but by clarity, strength, and authenticity. I had navigated betrayal, enforced accountability, and reclaimed agency. I understood now that the past could inform the future without controlling it. My journey has taught me that even in the darkest moments, one can find light, empowerment, and purpose. And so, I stepped into this new chapter, carrying the lessons of betrayal, the wisdom of confrontation, and the strength of resilience. I would no longer be defined by deceit or manipulation, but by courage, integrity, and the unwavering commitment to live truthfully and intentionally. The storm had passed, and on the other side was a life reclaimed. A life where trust is earned, boundaries are respected, and personal power is never surrendered. Betrayal had been painful, justice had been exacted, and life lessons had been learned. And in that, I found peace, strength, and the courage to move forward with dignity, clarity, and unwavering self-respect. Hope this story touched your heart. For more stories of love, resilience, and family, subscribe and stay connected.